I'm Deepak Chopra, and we are continuing our conversations with authors, luminaries, and scientists who are also interested in the science of spirituality. And it's my great pleasure today to invite Dr. Kelli Harding. She's an MD, and she's written this wonderful book called The Rabbit Effect: Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with the Groundbreaking Science of Kindness. Thank you very much for joining me, Dr. Harding.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely.
So tell me, what prompted you to actually write this book, The Rabbit Effect? How did it come about?
Well, so I think like you, I also got very interested in medical mysteries because, training as a physician, you start to learn sort of what's expected in terms of how a disease will progress. And in the hospital and in my own life and meeting lots of people, I was just really struck with the mysteries. And by that, I mean the illnesses that people live much longer than expected, or, people who have amazing recoveries, or also the flip side of that, people who maybe don't have anything that's diagnosable, but at the same time are really not feeling and functioning well. And I just got completely hooked trying to figure out what it was. And I suspect you've had a similar journey as well.
Yeah, I did, but I'm more curious about the title because you call it The Rabbit Effect. So I was, I was familiar with the study in 1980 in the journal Science, where scientists were giving rabbits diets that were very high in cholesterol. But there was one group of rabbits that didn't get the same level of hypercholesterolemia or hyperlipidemia or heart disease than the remaining group. And that group, apparently the technician who was feeding them, instead of just throwing the food at them, he would actually cuddle them and stroke them and then give them the same poisonous food. But their metabolic pathways were altered. The metabolic pathway for cholesterol metabolism was altered, and I'm just wondering if you had read that study or what gave you the idea of calling this the rabbit effect.
Well, thank you for describing that study so elegantly. And so that study for me, so I was a trainee and I got really interested in these mysteries. And then, initially I trained in internal medicine and then psychiatry. And then I did this fellowship in medically unexplained symptoms at Columbia. And I still didn't really feel like I had a good answer. And so actually one of my research mentors at Harvard actually had suggested that I check out this study about the rabbits. And, it's funny because Dr. Chopra, I suspect he probably had read it in one of your books, but he couldn't quite remember where he had read it. So I actually tracked down Dr. Neeram, who did the study, and I ended up talking with him about it. And the study just radically shifted, my trajectory, and I got much more interested in trying to figure out how the social world impacts health. So, so that was sort of how I learned about the study. And I have to just add a fun fact because I think you would enjoy this too. Is the study was initially designed, for an entirely different purpose in terms of looking at, cholesterol and diet and heart health, because it was the late 1970s and people really didn't have a great sense of that. And I know your dad was a cardiologist, if I'm not mistaken. And so I know that, this was this evolving field. And then Dr. Neeram, who did that study, he found that result, and much to his credit, and this for me is part of the joy of science and inquiry, is he realized that there was something off about it that was worth exploring. And I feel like for that mystery is what is the hook for me. Like what I love about medicine, what I love about your work is just trying to figure it out, like what's going on here, because we certainly are just at the beginning of our knowledge about how, physiology and biology and physics and all of it works. And so that was the super exciting part. So that's how, that study ended up sort of taking precedence, but it's just like decades of data that show the exact same thing. And I think it's so nice because it's also like what we know in our hearts to be true, that we feel better and we do better when we experience love and kindness. And that's something that every single human being is aware of.
I'm speaking with Dr. Kelli Harding. The book is called Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with the Groundbreaking Science of Kindness, The Rabbit Effect. So, just going over the book, which is very well done and has lots of good scientific references. The first part of the book is called The Hidden Factors. And I'm just going to read the titles. Chapter 1, Hidden Factors of Health. Chapter 2, One-on-One, Your Intimate Relationships. Chapter 3, Social Ties, Your Community. Chapter 4, Work, What You Do. Chapter 5, Education, Learning Your Purpose. Chapter 6, Neighborhood, Live and Play. Chapter 7, Fairness, Living by the Golden Rule. And Chapter 8, Environmental Influences, The Power of Compassion. So, as I was reading your book, very well researched and very well expressed, I also was reminded of some of the work I've been involved with the Gallup organization, which looks at well-being in right now 5 buckets: business well-being or corporate well-being, social well-being, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being, third, community well-being, and then the fifth is financial well-being. And people are asked to score themselves, based on certain questions, um, in these 5 buckets: corporate well-being or business well-being or job well-being, social well-being, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being, financial well-being, and community well-being. And there are various ways to score themselves, but if somebody scores, say, 8, 9, or 10, they're thriving, and they have a very high energy level. Somebody who scores, say, 6 or 7, they're struggling. Maybe they have a marital problem, or lost their job or something in those 5 areas. And if you score less than 5, then you're suffering. You probably already have a chronic disease. I just returned from the Kingdom of Bhutan, had a very interesting meeting with the king and queen over there. They're building an entire country the size of Singapore, which is based on these principles of mindfulness, relationships, emotional well being. So, can you summarize for me the major themes in this section of your book? The first section of the book. It's all about, in a sense, relationship, one way or another, right?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I can't wait to hear more about Bhutan because I talk about it in the book, and just also what a radical paradigm shift that is, and something that's so needed. So, in the initial section with the hidden factors, I think, when we look at health in the West, we've often really narrowed it down to the body and what's happening in the body. And I would say we even take it a step further. We break every body into little bits that different doctors study, and that's definitely important. And what we've also been missing is the big picture of health, because Dr. Chopra, the data really shows that the major determinant of our health is what's happening in our social world, and that's all these different areas of our lives, from what's happening in our homes with our relationships, what's happening in our broader relationships, what's happening in our communities, our neighborhoods, our schools, our workplaces, and then what's happening in society at large. And the data is there showing that these really have an impact, and it's something that was sort of hidden in plain sight. So, that's why I felt like it was something important, not just to talk about in the field of medicine, but it's something that every person who's listening to this needs to sort of rethink how they think about health. And that's so much what you do with your work too, is just thinking beyond the body to think about, what really matters when it comes to keeping us healthy.
Like you, of course, much earlier than you, I was trained in what we call the scientific model, which is basically reductionist and looks at causes of disease at the level of, say, molecules, and now even at the level of atoms and force fields. But reductionism is based on a concept that your body is actually made of something called physical matter. And we went to medical school. The first thing we learned was anatomy, which looks at the body as an anatomical sculpture. It's only later that we learn physiology and biochemistry and start to think of the body more as a verb than a noun, more as an activity, but it's never addressed where that activity is. So, that activity obviously is in awareness. So, recently, as you know, I wrote this book, Quantum Body, with two other scientists, Jack Tuzinski, who's a quantum biologist, and Brian Furtick, who's a neuroendocrinologist like me. And these guys are, experts in what is called quantum metabolism. My first insight into that happened many years ago. I was speaking to a patient and I didn't realize that the chart I was looking at wasn't his. And very reluctantly, I informed him that he might have cancer. And in 1 minute, his demeanor changed. His face was crestfallen. His blood pressure rose. He even had an arrhythmia. I'm sure his body got inflamed. And then 2 minutes later, I realized it was the wrong chart. I said, I'm really sorry. It's not you, it's somebody else. And immediately his metabolism changed. So it was obvious to me at that time that just a little bit of information, cancer or no cancer, could change your body's metabolism. But then, what is information if not an aspect of our awareness, our consciousness? And that gave me a clue that even though we treat the body as a physical object, it is actually a field of awareness. And once we regulate our awareness, both intellectual, mental, and that of what we call sensations, images, feelings, perceptions, then we get to a deeper level of reality, which is much more real than the scientific model. Not that the scientific model doesn't work, it definitely works in acute illness. You have an infection, you need an antibiotic. You have appendicitis, you probably need surgery, etc. But in chronic illness, it's becoming very apparent that the reductionist approach actually doesn't work, whether it's diabetes or metabolic syndrome or heart disease or autoimmune illness or even cancer, unless you treat the body as this field of awareness. And that field of awareness is inseparably connected with other aware beings or
Yeah,
humans or even pets in
yeah.
this case, then we are using a very incomplete approach.
I love that because that is at the heart of the rabbit effect and the story of it, and that um, how interconnected we all are is so fundamental to our health, and yet something that we live under, this illusion that we're all separate. And I think that's where I so appreciate your work, and how you help people see this profound connection between us all, and also the mystery of it all, which is part of the fun of it too.
But going back to my recent visit in Bhutan, it's very obvious that you have an entire population who lives by these principles, that your body is a field of awareness. You cultivate that through practices like mindfulness, inquiry, transcendence, body awareness, yoga nidra, breathing techniques. And now we can see that all of these actually have a profound effect on our parasympathetic nervous system, where the vagus nerve dominates. And even during COVID, we were doing through AI, we were looking meta-analysis, who was getting sick, who was getting high mortality, morbidity, and universally there was sympathetic overdrive, inflammation, anxiety, and depression that preceded the morbidity and mortality. I realized that our Western science has never really focused on the parasympathetic nervous system, which it turns out is the healing system in our body. And we have only focused on stress and sympathetic overdrive and addressing that, but not going to this deeper level where our awareness and sympathetic overdrive can be overcome through vagal stimulation. What is your opinion on vagal stimulation right now? All these things seem to work through activating the parasympathetic nervous system.
So I think you're exactly right. So if we look at sort of what is it about stressful environments, and it's this sort of um, elegant cascade in terms of sort of how we respond to stress, and then also how we respond to relaxation and the benefits of that, and all the things that we can do to improve our parasympathetic nervous system and help us relax. And I think for me, that's really, and I suspect with your work too, is it's so exciting because it really empowers individuals to make a change and make a difference. Like, this isn't something static that's happening in our body that's predetermined. It's actually something that's very dynamic, and it's something that we can actually play a role in, and how we address our thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of that impacts what's happening in our body. And I think I just love it, the idea of sort of because this mind body connection for me is infinitely fascinating, and thinking about how it is that we can alter our states so that we can live happier, calmer, more fulfilling lives, increase what we talk about as health span.
I'm speaking to Dr. Kelli Harding. She's an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University Irving Medical Center and has spent much of her career in the emergency room at New York-Presbyterian Hospital. She's appeared on the Today Show, Good Morning America, NPR, BBC, and in the New York Times and Washington Post. She lives with the family in New York. The New York Times Book Review had this to say about her book: the most interesting book on kindness, personal, while also steeped in data. Harding shows how our interconnectedness helps us stay healthier. And so, again, coming from Bhutan recently, where they live this kind of life quite spontaneously with the principles of the three Dharma seals. They say the relative is impermanent, number one. Number two, the separate self is an illusion. And number three, nirvana or transcendence is the only absolute reality. And around that is based the whole philosophy of what they call interbeingness. We are interbeings that inter-arise in the inter-isness. There's no such thing as a localized individual separate self. It doesn't exist. Once you start with that presumption, then all this makes perfect sense.
Yes, I have to say I so agree with you, Dr. Chopra, and also what I really love is that I approached this from a very sort of Western medical philosophy initially, and I realized, and especially reading quantum healing, this idea and the quantum body, that this idea that's sort of on the other side of this, that this is even bigger than we imagined. And there's just something about that that just feels incredibly peaceful and also really awe-inspiring to think about. I know the other evening when I saw you speak, you talked about just to sort of appreciate the incredibly magnificent moments of our day and how remarkable it is, to be walking down a street or to be, engaging in a conversation. And just if you can sort of step back and look at all these amazing different parts, all the things that had to go absolutely right to get to this exact moment, it's really astounding, and it's really fun. And it's also nice that it turns out it's good for your health to think in this way too. So
Word health comes from the word holy, which means
yes.
wholeness, return of the memory of wholeness. Holy,
Wow.
health, healing is the same word.
How could it be that I got to this point in my career and I had not realized that? Thank you. Wow. Because there is really something sacred about it. And I think, we all have human bodies that are prone to disease and breaking down and other challenges. And at the same time, there is just something so astoundingly incredible about bodies, and people can live and thrive and still do well despite illnesses. And for me, that's what I feel so passionate about, is I just want people to know that they have choices and they can make things better, not only for themselves, but for other people through their actions and thoughts.
The second part of the book is called Essentials of Health, and it does talk about chapter 9, the mind body link. And then, as for individuals, also for our collective well being. And then the final part is called the ripple effect, getting to kindness. And there's an afterword called enduring mystery. So, Dr. Harding, right now, you're spending most of your time teaching at Columbia. What is your main occupation these days?
So, teaching, seeing patients, and also just talking about all of this, because there's so much data around this that I feel like people still don't know. And, people are at different points of their understanding of the impact of the social world on our body, and our interconnectedness on our body. And so it feels like this incredibly important message to just keep telling people about this, that their kindness really matters. Because, I think, you talked earlier about the work you're doing with Gallup around the workplace. And, I think for a lot of times, many people, we spend a third of our lives at work, and their workplaces are not particularly kind to them, and they're not places that they feel that they're necessarily contributing to. And when you look at the statistics, it's always shocking how many people dislike their jobs and careers. And, so there are all these pockets, all these areas. I spend so much time talking to people in workplaces, in schools and community centers, and in hospitals too, just about the ways that we can make things better for one another, and also the ways that we can care for each other more, because we can turn this around. And I think, the sooner the messages that you're spreading, the sooner that we can all sort of adopt that, the better. I just wanted to say, I've been taking your incredible Pieces the Way course that you've recorded with Gabriella Wright, and it's so lovely and so meaningful. And I think it's just a beautiful example of how we as individuals can make a difference, whether it's through teaching, whether it's through taking kind actions, all of it. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Harding, I was just thinking, again, going back to Bhutan, that the best way to get rid of this illusion of the separate self is what they call the four divine attitudes, or the four divine emotions: loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity. So, those are the four guiding principles of getting rid of this hallucination that we call the separate self. Loving kindness, called metta, then sympathetic joy, which means joy at the success of others, and that is called mudita, and compassion, karuna, and equanimity, upeksha. opaque. If we all followed this, of course, we could extend our life and actually make chronic disease optional. As you know, only 5% of disease is determined by what are called fully penetrant genes. And even for that, now we soon have CRISPR and messenger RNA and other technologies. But 95% of illness is epigenetically modifiable. You can not only upgrade the activity of your genes, but you can change your microbial genes through diet and through vagal stimulation as well. So, given that, I think the future of health span is very bright as long as we don't mess it up with war and terrorism and social economic injustice and climate change. So, this is a moment where people need to hear this message of inseparability. We have the techniques to handle everything from climate change to health, longevity. But what we're lacking right now is the emotional and spiritual will to do it. Even climate change is reversible, but that spiritual sense of separation, um, the lack of spiritual identity is what's missing. We look at the world as the environment when in fact it's our extended body. You know, the air is our breath, the oceans are our circulation, the earth is recycling as our body, the trees are our lungs, and I don't know why we call that the environment. It is our extended body. We have a personal body, we have a universal body. They're both equally ours. You put a rabbit in a vacuum, it dies. You put a plant in a vacuum, it dies. You put them both together, they both thrive. So I think what's missing, in spite of all the technology and data, is this spiritual sense of inseparability. You know, the individual self will die, but the interbeing that we are
Mhm.
continues to recycle and evolve through eons of time.
It's so lovely, and I just adore the way that you've put that because it's just incredible because our legacy in many respects is the love and kindness that we leave in the world too. And I write about that in the afterword that, you know, long after our physical body is gone, you know, people remember how you made them feel, the love that you gave. I, I, I was always struck by, I believe it's in your book of secrets, where you talk about losing your dad and also just the legacy and the gift that that gives to families, to be able to think about that. So,
Well, in the
um,
deeper reality, even the physical body is not yours. You know, you have a million atoms right now that were once in the body of Jesus Christ or Moses or whoever. In just the last 3 weeks, a quadrillion atoms have gone through your body that have gone through the body of every other species on this planet. So even the body as a separate self is not is a figment of our imagination. The body doesn't exist by itself. Nothing exists by itself.
it's true, but yet we walk around with this illusion that we're separate, and it leads us to all kinds of difficulties with one another. There was an explanation you gave, and I'm not sure if I would get it right, but sort of like you used your hand to sort of say you've got the observer, you've got the what feels separate and the other, but in fact, if we mentally think about it, we're actually just all connected as all part of the same thing. And if we could sort of if we could increase awareness, and it really comes down to that awareness, if we could increase the awareness that those connections are fundamental and a part of ourselves, that you know it would change how we go about not only our everyday lives, but also how we think about societies and and the world and climate change for sure. So,
The observer and observed are one in the deeper consciousness.
yeah.
And I think your book is an amazing contribution to this conversation. I recommend everyone get this book, read it. You'll be informed with a lot of data, which is always very important. This is what um, the Washington Post had to say about this book. Kelli Harding stands apart from the horde, like physicians, and is compared here to William Carlos Williams, Atul Gawande. She's also a gifted writer. So thank you very much for joining me. And how's the book doing, by the way?
So the book came out right before the pandemic, and then I feel like I've been on a 4-year book tour because everyone got an education in public health for sure. I did want to just add one thing. So actually, when I was writing the book, I had a chapter on consciousness that never made it into the final publication because it didn't quite fit with the flow. And I actually got on an airplane and I flew out to Los Angeles to one of your conferences to Sages and Scientists, where I was really deeply impressed with the conversations that I was hearing and the deep thoughts and just the questions that were raised were so incredible. And I think while that chapter didn't end up being a final part of the book, I feel like your work so contributes to that. And also, you're such a teacher. And I think in some ways, while I'm a physician, I'm also an educator. And I just want to say, I deeply appreciate how you educate all of us on these bigger matters of health and spirituality. And it really, on the behalf of everybody, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, we are going to have Sages and Scientists in New York, May 8th, 9th, and 10th. So mark your calendar. You'll be getting more
Sounds great.
information on it. Just one last question. Are medical students following this teaching? Do you have any electives for medical students at Columbia? If not, we should think of introducing something like a medical elective for students at Columbia Medical School. What do you think of that?
I love that. And I'm always game to collaborate.
Well, talk to the people in charge, maybe at the medical school, and maybe we can start an elective with your leadership at Columbia Medical School.
That would be wonderful. Well, thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate your time because I know I saw your schedule. You are all over the place and it is remarkable. And
Yeah,
actually, you said something that I've got to ask you a follow-up question. The other day when I saw you, I said, do you get tired on all these trips? And you told me something that I keep thinking about how you're always please correct me if I got this wrong, that you're always at home. It's just your body that travels.
that's it. And my mind travels too, but I stay home. Yes.
Yeah,
My
yes.
body and my mind travel. Let's follow up on getting the medical students involved at Columbia. Would you talk to somebody at the medical school so we can actually make something out of this conversation that is long term?
That would be wonderful. Absolutely. So, and also thank you for introducing this spiritual aspect of connection, because I feel like kindness is really love in action, and I feel like that's the spiritual side that is sometimes missed in the medical world, but so incredible to our health and our well-being.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Harding. We'll follow up on this.
All right.
Wonderful to have you
Sounds
on the show.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.